have a fringe and I'm not quite used to it yet, so if you see me like playing around with it, please forgive me. I am trying real hard to keep these hands up to myself. Hello everyone, it's Bethany from Beth and Books and welcome back to this book nook. I'm really excited because today I am sharing with you another recommendations video. This time it's all about the atmospheric reads. It is coming up to Halloween. I think I'll be publishing this close to Halloween. I know in the Northern Hemisphere, which is where most of you guys on this channel are from, it's very cozy, so I really wanted to bring the vibes. Now, I have posted my spooky TBR books, so all the books I want to read, including my thriller, horror, mystery novels. But this is more of a specific video where I'm showing books I've already read and think are really good. Excuse me. And the way this video is going to be structured is I've got a book from different subgenres for each of these 10 books. Did that make sense? Probably not, but moving right along. So from the very beginning, we're going to start with some YA fantasy, moving through to adult fantasy, some horror, some YA thriller to adult thriller, and YA contemporary through to adult contemporary. So hopefully among this video, you'll be able to find a couple of books which you'll be interested in picking up for yourself. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into it. Alrighty, so the first book I have on this list is the young adult fantasy, and that is Shiver by Maggie Stavada. This is book 1 in the Wolves of Mercy Falls quad series. I'm pretty sure there's 4 books in it, and it follows the characters Grace and Sam. Now, let me set the premise of this. It's a paranormal, werewolfy kind of tale, but the reason why I popped it on this list is because it goes through the seasons in a way that really was, well, atmospheric. So Grace is the human in this, and when she's a child she was kind of taken away by wolves very briefly. She was in the woods, and we know that the wolves actually saved her, well, one wolf in particular did. And then there's Sam, who, shock horror, turns out to be a werewolf, and they are kind of inextricably linked. So there is like this little romance subplot, although it's not a heavy feature. But the way the werewolves turn is to do with the weather. So you kind of get this fluctuating seasonal difference within the novel that really makes you like wrap up. And a lot of it is set in the autumn or winter time. So it's really nice seeing the actual seasons being represented throughout a novel rather than the whole thing just being set in one. Next up is Ninth House by Leiber Dugo. This one had a lot of backlash, I think, on the world of BookTube. I so should have filmed a What the Hype video on it. Essentially, the biggest criticism of this novel is that not a lot happened, and although sure maybe the pace wasn't as intense as you would expect, it's super, super dark and foggy and misty, and that's why it's on this list. We follow Alex Stern, who is essentially at this university. So tell me what it's called? Yale. And she kind of gets sucked into this world where there's all these secret societies who kind of dabble in demonic magic, and it's not a big forefront. The biggest forefront is like this mystery trying to get to the bottom of it. So whilst it's got like this slow meandering pace, it is such a book that I can see you wrapped up warm in. It's so just beautiful in an eerie way. Oh, and I should mention, this I think was originally marketed as a new adult rather than a fully adult. I'm still honestly a bit blurred on where that line is, but it's definitely not young adult, so do with that what you will. So for the labelled adult fantasy, I have The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I couldn't help it, she's my favourite author, and one of the things I love about her writing is her world building and the vibe that she manages to put in her novels. So in this case, we follow 2 people, and it surrounds the story of a circus that pops up out of nowhere, and essentially the 2 young magicians unknowingly competing against each other, with the outcome being quite a drastic one. And the way the magic is in the story is why it's on this list today. It's such a beautiful, mystical kind of way of describing things. You enter different tents and they all have these beautiful different elements to them, like an ice castle or like a living jungle, and it's just wonderful, like wonderful as well as wonderful. It's I can never stop ranting and raving about Erin Morgenstern's writing. You just give it a go. Oh, and also it's got this really ingenious plot where it's multi-perspective, but the timelines get closer and closer. It's just really cleverly written. So for thrillers, I picked up this one for the young adult. It's a mild thriller, and this is Sadie. This is written by Courtney Summers, and I'm sure you guys have seen this because I myself picked it up from BookTube recommendation videos, but I just had to pop it out there. We follow Sadie, who is following the man who she thinks murdered her sister, and it's a mild revenge kind of plot. But the vibe in here, and the reason why it's on this list today, is that it's super tragic. That's the message I get from this. It's about sticking together with your only family and doing what you think is right in the midst of a tragedy. And the tone of which Sadie is built around the character, it's just something else. For the more adult thriller, I wanted to go with My Lovely Wife. Now, Gone Girl would be a shoo-in for this. It's brilliant, but I feel like lots of people have already heard of it and read it, so instead going with this one by Samantha Downing. This is about an unnamed narrator and his wife. Excuse me. It's primarily written from it's all written from the narrator's perspective, and essentially what happens is they accidentally murder someone, and Loki kind of that arouses them in the relationship. It adds like a new spark to it all. So they decide, shall we keep doing this? But what happens is the father essentially sees the effect these murders are having on his children. Children don't know he's the murderer or anything, but they're scared for their lives kind of thing because there's a murderer on the loose. And so he starts to develop this conscience, whereas his wife has kind of other ideas, and the plot twists and the turns in this novel were just fantastic. And the whole time I was reading this, I was sitting in a pool of suspense. Like, I was just waiting for someone else to get hurt, someone to figure it out, and then what did happen just blew my mind. It was just a really fast-paced, really well-written novel. Now, horror is a genre I haven't read much of, admittedly, but one that I've really fallen in love with is Thomas Harris's writing. So this is Red Dragon, which is the lesser-known book that's in the Hannibal series. So the Hannibal Lecter series is actually 4 books, and this is book 1. And why I chose this one instead of the Hannibal ones is, again, it's hopefully something you haven't all heard of, and Thomas Harris's writing is just phenomenal in this. So this follows, oh, sorry about that glare. This, let's try to get that rid of you, follows 2 perspectives. The murderer, the Red Dragon's perspective, or should I say the serial killer, because he's more than just one murderer, one victim murderer, you know what I mean. And the detective's perspective, trying to figure it out. And how do I put this without spoiling anything? The Red Dragon is twisted, and the way that Harris builds up his character and his backstory just had me gripped the whole time. I could not believe how it ended. I loved seeing the criminal's backstory and seeing why he thought what he did, because as an audience member, it really put me on the fence of, not that killing was right, but you almost felt sympathetic for a serial killer, which was just an interesting perspective for me, one that I had never felt before. So for the adult contemporary pick, I chose Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. Apologies, I feel like I need to say an apology if some of these aren't necessarily new to you. I've got a lot of these recommendations only in the past year, and I didn't want to recommend something that was actually bad, so if you've seen this around but haven't yet read it, definitely think about picking it up because it is so good and it is worth the hype it gets. We follow a whole host of characters, and essentially the central theme and topic is, there's lots of them, but the main one is about discussing if a Chinese baby should be adopted into a white American family and what effect that would have on its cultural identity. The baby's cultural identity. So that's a phenomenal conversation, but the whole mood is so somber throughout this. You see a mum who neglects a child, you see a debate going on about culture, you see a family that is constantly uprooted, and it's only once I actually stood back from the book I realised how moodily transcendent this novel was. And honestly, if you are someone who loves suburban dramas, pick this up for your Halloween reading. It is phenomenal. You will not regret it. Then just going straight into my last book on this list is my YA contemporary, which is Radio Silence. Wow, it took me a second there. Bless you. Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. There we go. My brain just stopped thinking there for a second. Now this one is the one YA contemporary that I find myself looking back on time and time again, because whenever I think, what is a LGBT representative book that really got me thinking and really taught me a lot about that world? I mean, how do I describe this? You've got your two central characters. The first one, her name is Frances, and she's known as the studier. Then there's Aled, who is known as the quiet straight A students. And the premise of the novel is that right at the very beginning, oh, I just love this book so much. Right at the very beginning, they said, the author, narrator says, these guys do not fall in love. And so the whole time it's just building their friendship. But there's, now let's see if I can get this right, asexual representation, pansexual representation, homosexual representation, and there might be more that I'm just forgetting. But the fact that it wasn't just, and I don't want to sound like I'm shunning like bisexual or homosexual, but those are the LGBT groups that I see represented most in these texts. So to see different groups within LGBT plus represented was phenomenal. And then the reason why it's on this list is it isn't all fairy tales and daisies. It's really gritty and realistic, and you see the trials and tribulations that friendships actually have to go through to be successful, and that sometimes they're not, and you've got to work really hard to get them good again. And it just really touched me. And if you want a book that will like make you on the verge of tears the entire time you're reading it, pick this one up. Verge of tears in a way just because you feel so much for the characters. It's a really well character driven novel, so that was great. I just realised I lied, there's 8 books, not 10, but that's the end of my list. That is the 8 books that I recommend for some atmospheric reading. I hope if you pick any of these up, you enjoy them, and if you have some books on your own radar that you think should be on this list, please drop a comment below. I love seeing what you guys recommend. And with all that being said and done, I hope you have a fantastic spooky Halloween and enjoy all the places you go in your own reading adventures. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.